In this video, I want to show you all promising underdogs, the best inexpensive favorites, and the best bets to consider for this weekend. I'll also provide my final probability for each fighter's victory, along with their stat differentials. If you find this informative, helpful, or entertaining, please like and subscribe. It really helps keep me motivated to create these videos for you all. I've also added my Patreon information in the description if you want to support me there. There's a $10 a month contribution tier and a $20 a month premium tier. The premium tier gives you early access to all of the analysis and results from my videos, along with the additional data analysis and stats. This includes my prediction model results, fighter history, stat overviews, promising underdogs, best inexpensive favorites, prop bets to consider, and deep dives into each fighter's record and historical fights. So you'll get to see their strengths, their weaknesses, their consistency across different stats, and their stat comparisons versus all of their historical opponents' averages. All of this combined will help you with your picks and bets. There's a $20 a month tier, which is around $5 per event, and you can also purchase each of these separately, but the membership is cheaper and easier. Plus, you're directly helping with the improvement and expansion of the content for this channel. Running this data, analysis, and prediction models takes hours every day and week, so I'd greatly appreciate any support that you can show. And thank you to everyone who has shown me support recently. Also, if you like detailed breakdowns and predictions, I do those weekly for full cards as well, including prelim fights, so feel free to check those out on my channel. Let's go ahead and jump right in. So UFC 312 is today. Let's quickly review the most promising underdogs for the card, the best favorites that are relatively inexpensive for this card to consider, and the best bets to consider stylistically, statistically, and all things considered. So thank you guys for joining. Let's quickly get started. Let's start with the promising underdogs. From the top, we'll go all the way down the card, starting with Sean Strickland. So the first promising underdog that I do want to share with you guys is Sean Strickland. Now, this guy absorbs 0.37 less strikes per minute than Dracus does. He has a 7% higher striking defense than Dracus. He also has a 14% higher takedown accuracy and a 27% higher takedown defense. Now, all things considered, I gave Sean Strickland about a 35% probability of victory, and I think he's a good underdog to feature for several reasons. Although statistically 35% is not a lot in terms of a probability, Sean Strickland does have a lot of things going for him, and he did have a really good first fight against Dracus, all things considered. Now, taking a look at Sean's record, he's won 29 fights total. He's finished just over half of those at 52%. In the UFC, the guy has had 22 fights. He's definitely on the late stage of his professional fighting career and his UFC fighting career. So he's had 22 fights in the UFC. He's won 16 of those. Recently, he's been on a tear with high-level opponents. He's won 4 of his last 5 fights, and he is coming off of a win into this fight, so he does have some momentum on his side. In fact, the last time Sean lost was January of last year, so it's been a while since he's faced a loss, and he's had a lot of time to work on the things that he struggled with in his first fight against Dracus. Now, let's talk about things aside from stats alone that make Sean a pretty good underdog with some value as well. The first thing would be his very interesting defense. Now, as wild as Sean Strickland may seem, he does have some technical defense. He uses that Philly shell really well. And when you take a look at du Plessis' fighting game, what du Plessis ends up doing is he really extends his punches and he leans very forward when he's striking. And so that kind of defensive posture is going to allow Strickland to really protect himself against some of du Plessis' power shots and even set up some really good counter punching opportunities. I'm not saying Sean Strickland is Floyd Mayweather, but guys with the Philly shell, they're pretty good at setting up that counter really well. Let's go on. So he's also able to frustrate du Plessis' offensive rhythm with his style whenever it comes to the Philly shell and the volume he throws. And Strickland's also good with pressure fighting. He's constantly pushing forward. And that's a huge reason why he was able to defeat Israel Adesanya, is just he really overwhelmed him. And so I think that's going to limit du Plessis a little bit in setting up his own attacks. And also what I really like about Sean Strickland is he does focus on the jab and he does execute the jab very, very well. And that has a lot of advantages. It could keep du Plessis at a good distance. It could set up his power punch. It could ruin du Plessis' rhythm and timing. And Strickland is also really good at just being efficient in the octagon. I mean, he doesn't really exert more energy than he needs to. And he's good at controlling the pace and the location of the fight. And he really stays composed under pressure. Sometimes it feels like there's not a thought between his eyes. He's just pushing forward. He's being technical. And he's throwing that volume, and that's good when it comes to fighting. You don't want to be distracted, you don't want to be emotional, and I do like how stoic Strickland looks sometimes in the octagon. Now, other times towards the end of the fight, he might get a bit emotional because he knows he's winning, blah blah blah. But regardless, you get what I'm saying. Now, he also uses the front kick really well. He throws it a bit awkwardly, but he still uses it pretty efficiently. It works for him more times than it doesn't. All in all, I wouldn't be completely shocked if Sean Strickland is able to pull off the upset, and if he is, I would think that he gets it done via decision. I'm still leaning towards Dricus du Plessis, but I had to show you guys the value in choosing Sean Strickland. If you are leaning towards that side, that's definitely a bit valuable given everything that Sean is bringing to the table. We move on for the next promising underdog on this card that I really want to highlight for you guys. It's Tatiana Suarez. Now, this match is a toss-up, honestly, and it's because both bring very, very different things to the table, and they're both very skilled in what they do. But let's talk about why Tatiana Suarez has value if you're leaning towards her. She has a height advantage of 1 inch. She's a year younger. She also has a reach advantage of 3 inches, so she has a bit of a physical advantage. Now, with that, she's also able to have a 10% higher striking accuracy while absorbing 1.8 less strikes per minute, landing 3.7 more takedowns on average with a 15% higher takedown accuracy, with a 50% higher takedown defense, while also landing 0.4 more submissions on average. Tatiana Suarez on paper has a lot of statistical advantages, and large ones over Zhang Weili. Now, for that reason, and also a lot of the stylistic things I've seen in her game, I ended up giving Tatiana Suarez a very close 49% probability of victory, and that is such a sweet spot for an underdog. So if you're already leaning towards Tatiana Suarez, let this be a bit of a confirmation and validation that she is really good, even in my opinion, after all my research, even in the data science models' opinions. In fact, the data science models lean towards her. They gave her a 51% probability of victory, as you could see on the top of your screen, but I ended up switching over once I've done my research on Weili. But again, this is very close to 50-50. It could go either way, so I totally understand if you're going for the value here and you're looking for Tatiana Suarez. So let me first break down her record real quick. She's won 11 fights. She's finished 73% of those. Now, she's had 8 fights within the UFC, and guess what? She's won all 8 of those 8 fights. Recently, she's won all 5 of her last 5 fights, and she's coming off of an 11-fight win streak. She's done a great job of staying under the radar, getting all of those wins in a row, and just climbing the rankings continuously, and she's done a great job at that. But let's talk about the stylistic things that are really going in her favor. The first thing would be her elite wrestling background. She does have wrestling pedigree that's pretty much unmatched in this division. She has multiple world championships and Pan American titles in freestyle wrestling. So I want you guys to keep that in mind if you are leaning towards her. She has a takedown rate of over 6 per 15 minutes and a 61% takedown accuracy. And she just deploys that very, very well throughout her fights with relentless pressure and control. I mean, she's known for that aggressive smothering style, a lot of aggression, and that just really overwhelms a lot of her opponents. And so she's demonstrated that against even former champions like Carla Esparza, pretty much dominated her for 2 rounds before just finishing her in the 3rd. Tatiana Suarez, she also has a lot of submission threats from multiple positions throughout the fight. I mean, she has a very diverse submission game, especially that front headlock position. I mean, she's finished 5 of her 10 wins via submission, including that recent guillotine choke over Jessica Andrade and Montana De La Rosa, etc., etc. She's also a southpaw. Keep that in mind. I mean, as a southpaw, she does have a bit of a different look that Zhang has a lot of limited experience in, especially within the UFC. That stance, it really creates some awkward angles, makes it very hard for your opponent like Zhang to land some of her own powerful strikes. Also, if you look at Suarez's wrestling style, it really allows her to just keep this grueling pace that it inevitably wears down her opponents. Now, her ability to maintain that kind of pressure throughout the fight, I saw a lot of that in her win over Nina Nunes. That was very interesting. And what her style really does is it allows her to neutralize some of her opponent's striking. And that's going to be tough for Zhang Weili to overcome. And I think that's a big part of the toss-up here. All in all, I would not be shocked at all if Tatiana Suarez pulls off the upset here. And if she does, I think she would get it via decision. I don't see her necessarily getting a finish over someone like Zhang Weili, but that's the verdict if you are going for Tatiana Suarez. Now, the next promising underdog that I really want to highlight for you guys, it's Justin Tafa. Now, Tafa, he absorbs 4.7 less strikes per minute than Talison Teixeira does. All in all, I ended up giving Justin Tafa a 40% probability of victory. I think he's a good underdog to feature. Keep in mind, this guy's won 7 fights. He's finished all of those 7 fights. So if he lands on you, you are pretty much screwed. Now, he's had 9 fights in the UFC, of which he's won just about half. He's won 4 of those 9. Recently, he's done decent. He's won 3 of his last 5 fights, but he is coming off of a loss into this particular fight. I still think that Justin poses some strengths and some value as an underdog, especially if you're leaning towards him based on experience and other stuff. But let's talk about some of those non-statistical factors that are leaning towards Justin Tafa if you do want to throw some money his way, but also adjust for risk and reward. So the first thing that I want to mention about Justin Tafa, like I said a little bit earlier, it's going to be his experience against high-level opponents. I mean, he's been fighting in the UFC since 2019. He's faced some experienced opponents overall, and even some strikers, like your guys like Carlos Felipe, Carl Williams. And I think that that kind of experience, it should help him in this fight against Teixeira. He's also pretty durable. He's only been knocked out once, and if he is able to withstand some of that early punishment from Teixeira, that should help him adapt to some of those striking exchanges. Some of the things that Tafa does really well, I like how he blends those body head combinations with those clinch knees, and I think that that kind of stuff could disrupt Teixeira's rhythm in this fight. He's also able to close the distance really well, especially against taller opponents. We've seen that a lot. Even like, for example, his fight with Austin Lane, where a lot of people were thinking Lane might win, but he was able to close that distance and get the job done pretty much. I like his footwork too, and I think that that kind of improvement, it should help him weather some of Teixeira's initial offensive onslaught, right? Like that early on pressure that Teixeira's going to put on him. Tafa, he's pretty composed in the octagon. He's been in some high pressure situations and fights, and so with that, I think that him being able to adapt, to remain calm, those are key things that are going to go in his favor. Whereas you might have a more emotional Teixeira who is making his debut and wants to make a good impression, wants to get the job done early, yada yada yada. I think Tafa's going to be a little bit more careful overall while also being powerful. I don't think he's like the most technical fighter in the world, don't get me wrong, but I do think that he's going to just be able to be a little bit more composed with his experience. All in all, not to extend this too long, I think that if Justin Tafa is going to pull off the upset, it would not shock me if he gets the KO/TKO. Again, I think there's about a 40% chance of that happening, meaning I'm leaning towards Teixeira at about 60%, but I still think that Tafa is a good underdog to feature because he does surprise a lot of people sometimes, and if he is able to land on you, you're in trouble. That's all I'm going to say on that. So if you are leaning towards Justin Tafa, then I do think there's about a 40% chance that the odds go in your favor, and that is not bad at all. That's pretty much a sweet spot when it comes to underdogs. Let's move on. The next promising underdog that I want to highlight for you guys is Jimmy Crute. Now, Jimmy Crute is a year younger than his opponent here, Rodolfo. He also absorbs 2.9 less strikes per minute than Bellato does. He lands 3.8 more takedowns on average. He has a 32% higher takedown accuracy, and he lands 1.5 more submissions on average. Those are some key advantages that he holds. Now, all things considered, I did give Jimmy a 31% probability of victory, meaning I ended up giving Bellato a 69% probability of victory, which is relatively high, but there's still a lot of good things that Jimmy Crute has in his game, and that I believe make him a good underdog for this specific card. First, let's take a look at his record. Now, he's won 12 fights total, and he's finished 75% of those. He's had 9 fights within the UFC, of which he's won 4, just about half. Recently, he's won only 1 fight out of his last 5, and he is coming off of a loss, and I think that negative momentum is really what's weighing him down in even the model readings and even in my personal opinion. But let me talk about the good things that he has in case you do want to throw a little bit his way to get some value, right? The first thing that I really like about him is his grappling experience. I mean, he's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. He has a lot of grappling experience, and that high-level background, it could give him an edge whenever it comes to those scrambles and some of those submission attempts against Bellato. Also, I think that he's shown a bit more of a measured and tactical approach in his fights compared to Bellato, who was more of a aggressive fighter all in all, right? And so, for example, like in his fight against Mikhail Olejniczak, Crute, he really showed a lot of patience and some strategic takedowns as well, just to control the fight. If you look back at the fight, you'll see what I'm saying. He also does defensive wrestling really, really good, and that might be a bit crucial when it comes to neutralizing Bellato's offense in this fight, especially his offensive wrestling attempts, and just keeping the fight where Crute wants it to be and where he might be able to excel. He's also pretty adaptable overall. I've seen some instances where he's adjusted his game plan a little bit mid-fight. A few other key notes: I like his cardio and endurance overall. I mean, he's gone the distance plenty of times in the UFC, and Bellato, he's shown a bit of a tendency to slow down whenever it comes to those later rounds. So what does that mean? If he can take the fight a little bit later into the rounds, that could give Crute more of an advantage, meaning he might be sitting at an opportunist area right now if you see the fight getting extended like that a little bit. Now for the final promising underdog, before we jump into the best favorites for this card and before we take a look at the best prop bets for this card on the entire card, it's going to be Tom Nolan versus Vyacheslav Borshev. Now, Tom Nolan, he has a height advantage of 4 inches here. He's also 9 years younger, and he also has a reach advantage of 4 inches. Now, with that, he's able to land 1.3 more strikes per minute than his opponent, and he has a 31% higher takedown defense. All things considered, I give Tom Nolan about a 40% probability of victory, and that makes him a great underdog feature all in all. He's won 8 fights, finished 63% of them. He's had 3 fights within the UFC, of which he's already won 2, and recently, if you zoom out, he's won 4 of his last 5 fights, and he's coming off of a 2-fight win streak into this card. So he has a good amount of momentum with him as he continues to grow in his professional fighting career. He's only 24 years old. So not only does he have a physical advantage, but he's also a very creative striker. I mean, the strikes that he throws, you just don't commonly see them in the UFC or in MMA in general. His style is very similar to guys like Corey Sandhagen or even Anthony Pettis, who was very entertaining to watch if you did watch UFC in that mid to late 2010s era. He was very fun to watch, and I think that kind of creative striking, I mean, it speaks for itself, right? It keeps your opponent guessing. It could open up opportunities that your opponent might have whenever it comes to defensive lapses and a bunch of other things, right? Now, one thing I will say, Borshev, he is the more experienced fighter, which is ultimately why I ended up leaning towards him. The prediction models actually ended up picking Tom Nolan at 51%, if you could see above, but I had to normalize that with all my research. I am thinking Vyacheslav gets it done logically, but I still think Tom Nolan has this surprise element to his game, which could bring the upset on, and you could tell the odds are really close in this fight. It should be a very fun fight and kind of an underrated fight on this card. Now let's take a look at the best favorites for this card that are relatively inexpensive for their skill set and the expectations that I have in them winning. And so for these, I'm not going to go in depth into the non-statistical factors. What I'm going to do for these favorites is I'm just going to read off their statistical advantages here, and we are going to push forward and head towards those prop bets in a second. So the first inexpensive and confident favorite that I want to highlight for you guys in this card is Jake Matthews. Now Jake Matthews, he has a height advantage of 1 inch here, a reach advantage of 4 inches. He has a 3% higher striking accuracy while also absorbing 3.12 less strikes per minute. He has a 9% higher striking defense, and he has a 40% higher takedown defense while landing 0.2 more submissions on average. That's a lot of statistical advantages, as you could see on your screen here. All things considered, I give Jake Matthews a 72% probability of victory, and I think he's a great favorite to feature. Now, another favorite that I really liked on this card, it's going to be Gabriel Santos. Now, this is an interesting one because I ended up going with the underdog for my pick here. I went with Jack Jenkins, and I gave him a 54% probability of victory, which is very close to 50-50, but a lot of people are going for Gabriel Santos, and I do understand why. Stylistically for sure, and even statistically, I ended up going with Jack Jenkins, but still I wanted to feature Gabriel because I think he is a good favorite to feature if you are leaning towards him. So take this as a bit of a confirmation if you are. Now his advantages here, he has a height advantage of 2 inches over Jack. He's also 3 years younger than him, and he has a 2-inch reach advantage over him. He also lands 1.32 more takedowns on average, and he has a 9% higher takedown defense. Again, all things considered, I gave Santos a 46% probability of victory, very close to that 50% mark. A lot of people are going for him as a favorite, and I do think he's a good favorite to feature on this card. Full disclosure, I'm still leaning towards Jack Jenkins ever so slightly with a 54% probability. Now the next inexpensive and confident favorite that I want to feature on this card, it's gonna be Kevin Jousset. Now Kevin, he has a height advantage of 2 inches. He lands 7.4 more strikes per minute, and when you pair that with a 31% higher striking accuracy and a 32% higher striking defense, that really goes well together, and that's a key advantage that he holds. Now he also has a 50% higher takedown defense. All things considered, I'm giving Kevin a 71% probability of victory, and I think he's a great favorite to feature on this card. The next inexpensive and confident favorite that I want to highlight for you guys is Hyun-Sung Park. Now Park, he lands 1.02 more strikes per minute. He has a 6% higher striking accuracy, an 8% higher striking defense, and he has a 48% higher takedown defense as well, while landing 0.2 more submissions on average. Now, all things considered, I gave Park a 71.2% probability of victory, and I think he's another great favorite on this card. Now the final confident favorite that I want to highlight for you guys before we take a look at those bets, it's going to be Cody Steele. Now Cody Steele, he absorbs 0.53 less strikes per minute. He has a 16% higher striking defense and a 15% higher takedown defense. All things considered, I'm giving Cody Steele a 58% probability victory, and I think he is a good favorite to feature on this card as well. Now let's take a look at those bets that I think have value for this card and have a good statistical and stylistic possibility of happening. Please disregard any kind of prop bets you see where you're picking the other guy to win, obviously. So I'll start from the top of the card and I will work my way down. First, I would consider for the Dracus du Plessis versus Sean Strickland fight, I would consider taking du Plessis via decision. I think that's most logically likely to happen and stylistically. And if you wanted to play this a little bit neutral, you could also take, or you could take the over 1.5 to the distance, depending on how much risk to reward you want to consider. For the co-main event, we have Zhang Weili versus Tatiana Suarez. For that fight, just to play it safe, I would take the over 1.5 to the distance. That fight is so 50-50 that I don't really like the prop bets on either end. I just like that over 1.5 to the distance. For Justin Tafa versus Taliesin Teixeira, that's an interesting fight. For that fight, I would take Teixeira via KO/TKO. I think that's most likely to happen. But if you did want to play it a little neutral, or if you want to add something to that, you could take it not going the distance or any of the under rounds, just depending on how much risk you're willing to take. Moving down, we have Jimmy Crute versus Rodolfo Bellato. For that fight, I would consider taking Bellato via KO/TKO, or if you want to play neutral or if you want to add something, you could also take the not distance or any of those under rounds for that fight that could help you out. Now, continuing, for Jake Matthews versus Francisco Prado, I would consider taking Matthews via decision, or you could play it with over 1.5 to the distance, any of those rounds, just depending on how much risk you're willing to take, or if you want to play neutrally. That's the idea for that fight. Continuing, we have Jack Jenkins versus Gabriel Santos. For that fight, I'm taking Jenkins via decision. You could also take the over 1.5 to the distance, just to give you guys some options and different ideas for each fight. Now let's continue. For Wayne Kong versus Bruno Brazil, for that fight, I would consider taking Wayne via KO/TKO. I think that's likely to happen, especially if you study Wayne and look into this dynamic. Now you could also take the fight not going the distance or any of those under rounds, depending on when you think she gets it done. Again, that's going to give you some options for this fight if you want to play a bit neutral, but I don't see it going the distance based on both these gals. Let's continue. For Jonathan McCalla versus Kevin Jousset, for that fight, I would consider taking Kevin via decision. Also, if you want to play it neutral or want to add something, you could take the over 1.5 to the distance. That would not shock me. Let's continue. For Quilan Salkilde versus Unshul Jubilee, for that fight, I would consider taking Salkilde via KO/TKO, especially from the defensive lapses I've seen on Unshul Jubilee and the skills that I've seen on Salkilde. I think that's likely to happen. If you want to play a bit neutral, you could also take the fight not going the distance or any of the under rounds, just depending on when you think that finish might happen from either guy. Let's continue. For Hyun-Sung Park versus Nyanjargal Temendembarel. For that fight, I would consider taking Park via decision or the over 1.5 to the distance. That would not surprise me at all, and that could let you play that one a bit neutral if you're undecided on that one. Let's continue. For Cody Steele versus Rong Zhu. For that fight, I would consider Steele via KO/TKO. I think there's a good chance that we see that. You could also take the fight not going the distance or any of the under rounds, just depending on how much risk or reward you're willing to take. Those are my ideas for this card. That's what I liked in the statistics and stylistically when I studied all of these guys and rewatched their footage, which was very fun preparing for UFC 312. Thank you guys so much for watching both videos this week. If you have not seen my video from earlier this week and you did want a detailed breakdown before tonight's event, please be sure to check that out. Also, do me a huge favor, hit that like, hit that subscribe. Please help this channel grow, help the algorithm learn that I do my research. I share a lot of value with my viewers, so please help the algorithm grow. I really appreciate all of you guys. I'm excited for tonight's event. Drop any comments. Let's have a discussion in the chat. Thanks once again, guys, and see you guys tonight. Let's win some money. And with that said, that wraps up this video. I really appreciate you all for watching and being so supportive as always. Please make sure to like and subscribe, and check out that Patreon if you want to support me through there as well. There's a $10 a month contribution tier and a $20 a month premium tier, which includes early results, picks, and bets, and also includes premium data, analysis, and stats as well. Your support helps keep me encouraged and motivated to continue running all of this data and analysis for you guys and providing you guys all these insights. So thank you once again, and as always, see you guys in the next one.